I posed this question over at dogpost.com. I'm going to pose it here. Is Georgia's defense good enough to carry the Dogs to the top, carry them to the end if the offense remains inconsistent throughout the course of the season? Don't think I'm telling any secrets here. Georgia's offense has been inconsistent, right? It's had some really good moments. It's had some really bad moments. They've won games despite that, if you want to put it that way, but they've also helped win games because of it, right? But at the end of the day, it has not been a consistent product. There have been good games, there have been bad games, and there have been good halves and bad halves, and that happens in football, right? But I did not expect it to be as all over the place as it was heading into the season, right? We talked a lot about in the offseason. I hyped it up, all right? I hyped it up. I told you I thought this offense had a chance to put up 40 per game. I thought that they could really go crazy with Carson Beck in the passing game. I thought that the running game was definitely going to be better with ETN and Frazier and Roger Robinson. A lot of those things just haven't happened. And part of the reason why Georgia is doing so well this season is because of that defense. A defense that I think we had a lot of confidence in heading into the year, but weren't sure exactly how it was going to perform in certain areas, especially the secondary. And look, guys, outside of a bad half against Alabama, a couple bad sequences against Mississippi State, Georgia's defense has been pretty lights out. It's been shut down. It starts with that first week. It started with that Clemson game. The Dogs have been dominant on that side of the ball, right? Against Clemson, 34-3. 6-3 was the halftime score. Okay, so first half, it's like, okay, well, Georgia's offense not it just wasn't moving the ball the way that Clemson wasn't moving the ball, right? It wasn't that they were turning the ball over or anything like that, but Georgia's defense helped keep them in that game, obviously. Second half, Georgia's offense explodes. Georgia's defense continues the exact same level of play, and that turns into a 34-3 blowout. But you look at the numbers of that game, I don't think that Clemson ran for 50 total yards. They didn't. All right, it was 46, right? I was trying to get the exact number because I knew that it was under 50. Georgia held them to less than 190 yards, fewer than 190 yards of total offense. Clemson is averaging almost 500 yards of total offense, so this number gets into that average, and it's bringing it down a little bit. Now, Clemson hasn't played very good teams this season, and I'm not as high on the Tigers as I think the rankings are. I just think that when it comes to big games towards the end of the season, I don't have a lot of faith in Clemson this year. Just like a big game at the beginning of the season, Georgia shut it down. But this Clemson offense is plowing through the ACC. That's all I got to say. And Georgia made it look like a JV squad. Ryan Clay from Dog Post. Link below for the newsletter. Right, you want to get notifications when I put out stories, when there's breaking news, when Dean has Leggy's thoughts, final feelings. We do this every week, guys, and every single day we push the newsletter out, and it's free. It's a great way to stay in touch with what's going on with the Dogs. You want to be first. You want it to be interesting, entertaining. Dog Post newsletter. All you got to do is put your email address in the link in the description down below. Ryan Curley from Dog Post. Tennessee Tech, I kind of throw that game out of there. I'm going through the schedule a little bit here. Look, it's hard to evaluate what happened against Tennessee Tech, but Georgia's defense, good. I thought that they ran the ball better against Georgia than they should have. The Golden Eagles of Tennessee Tech, that is. But, getting over 100 yards, whatever, right? I don't think Tennessee Tech threw for 30 yards in that game. Actually, I can confirm they didn't throw for that many yards. So Georgia's defense shut down against a cupcake opponent. You move forward. What happened? A bad offensive performance. At Lexington at night, Georgia had trouble running the ball, had trouble throwing the ball. Carson Beck was off a little bit. Seemed like between him and the receivers, it was maybe a joint thing in terms of being off. And Georgia it had to have a good defensive performance, so they weren't going to win that game. So what does the defense do? Doesn't allow Kentucky to score. 12 points, 4 field goals. Passing, Kentucky was not going to pass all over Georgia. They shut down Brock Vandagriff. They were in the backfield consistently. Tyrion Ingram, Tyrion, I forgot that he pronounces it Tyrion. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins was disruptive. No one was as disruptive as Jalen Walker, though, right? And he was in the backfield often. I don't think he actually recorded any real stat, like a tackle for loss or a sack or anything like that, if my memory serves correctly on that. But boy, when it comes to pressures and hurries, I bet that when you look at advanced stats, he was all over the place. He was in the backfield a lot. Georgia's defense, obviously, like I said, disruptive. And the offense played just well enough to win by 1 point. They put together that drive where Etienne has an explosive run. They cap it off with a Branson Robinson touchdown. And again, it was Georgia's defense that really, really was the main reason why the Dogs won and escaped what would have been a bad upset and what would have been a bad loss on the resume for Georgia, when the resume matters just as much as it used to. You move forward. And Alabama's next, and they had 2 weeks to prepare because they had the bye. And Alabama smacks them across the face at the beginning of the game. And they scored 28 points within the first 18 minutes of the game, 18-ish minutes of the game. Milroe throwing, Milroe running. Ryan Williams makes some crazy plays. Milroe threw a beautiful pass to Jam Miller. Georgia was not prepared, and that's what Kirby Smart pretty much opened his post-game press conference with. Took the blame there. And I think that it's probably true that it was a coaching thing. Because we know that Georgia's a better team than Alabama. It just is. Right? We've watched enough to know that. It was the case last year, too. Alabama's had Georgia's number, and in this case, they've had Kirby's number. And they had Kirby's number enough to beat Georgia, because what happens after that beginning? Well, then Georgia's defense shuts Alabama down for 70% of the game, right? I think the numbers were from the 12.5-minute mark, 12:32 to be exact, to the 2-minute and roughly 15-second mark in the fourth quarter. So we're talking about most of the fourth quarter, the entire third quarter, most of the second quarter. Alabama had field goals, 2, I think. 1 or 2. That's coaching, and that's Kirby, and that's the players being more prepared. Right? Alabama changes its game plan a little bit. They adjust as they start blowing out Georgia, but they shut them down, and Georgia's offense starts playing well. Right? It just was too little too late there at the end, and Alabama closed that game out. Then you move on and play really well against Auburn, right? Obviously, a couple of explosive runs by Auburn. What am I saying a lot? Explosive plays. If Georgia limits explosive plays, they're going to dominate. That's what they did against Texas, and I'll get to that in a second. Auburn shut them down. Peyton Thorne doesn't really affect the game with his arm. It's just Darquez Hunter running the ball well, and 31-13, something like that, right? Georgia wins that game. Good defensive performance. Georgia's offense got to be vanilla and still win by double digits because of how good the defense was. Then you move on to Mississippi State, and they were playing really well until they weren't. And Kirby thought that they were embarrassed because of that. So what happens? They follow that up. They go to Austin. Texas is number 1 ranked in a lot of offensive categories heading into that game. Weren't really tested on the schedule. Then they get tested by a Georgia defense that was 100% prepared for it. Right? And you hear Jalen Walker talk about that after game, and how they talk about, we knew where Quinn Ewers was going to escape in the pocket. We knew what he wanted to do. We knew where he wanted to go. And that was the case. And they disguised a lot of blitzes. It was one of those things where Georgia doesn't show this in all the other games. Why? So they can do it in the game against Texas. And they shut down the team that everyone anointed the best in the country heading into it. Right? And now that's changed. So Georgia's defense, and my biggest point there was that the offense was not great. Carson Beck, 3 picks. 1, I don't think, it's all the trash throwing, all that, whatever. But the other 2 picks were not great. And Georgia's receivers did not help him. And the run game was just good enough. Etienne gets a couple big runs, gets 3 touchdowns. But again, it's Georgia's defense. It's Jalen Walker. It's Tyrone Ingram Dawkins, Christian Miller, Michael Williams. Those guys up front. The task was, are they going to be as good, or are they going to be good enough? And they have been in big games outside of that Alabama first half. So is it good enough to carry the Dogs if the offense remains inconsistent? I think it's good enough to carry them into the playoffs. I think it's good enough to maybe win a playoff game. I don't know if it's good enough to win the national championship. I also don't expect Georgia's offense to be this consistent the entire season. They're going to figure it out at some point. Thanks for watching.